will move quickly on the brisk southwesterly breeze, highs of 20.
And in Northern Ireland, often cloudy across the country this lunchtime, with scattered heavy showers, windy towards the east coast, feeling muggy with some sunny spells developing in places, temperatures about 20.
So unsettled in the northwest throughout the rest of the day, dry and sunny in the southeast. And that's your forecast.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up this morning on The Political Correction, we're joined by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to discuss the Conservative leadership race. And we're also talking about travel disruption after holidaymakers were warned of another day of gridlock at the Port of Dover and the Channel Tunnel. That plus plenty more after the latest news with Tamsin.
Deanna, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. Roads to the Port of Dover are reportedly flowing normally after 2 days of disruption, causing chaos for travellers and lorry drivers. Additional checks on the border post-Brexit and understaffing of French officials has been blamed for the delays. As of 6 a.m, P&O Ferries said there were queues of around 15 minutes to reach border control. It comes after drivers faced waits this weekend of up to 18 hours. Secretary of State for Wales, Robert Buckland, said the delays were down to a lack of French border staff.
It does seem that there have been personnel problems with French customs, which have delayed things even more. It's always a very busy time of year as the school holidays start, and therefore I think it's very important that the French authorities work closely with our British counterparts to make sure they've got the staff levels necessary to deal with the number of people that are going on their holidays or indeed going about their normal business through the short straits of Dover-Calais.
Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have vowed to toughen controls on migration as part of their bids to become next Tory leader and Prime Minister. Mr Sunak said he would tighten the definition of who qualifies for asylum and introduce a cap on refugee numbers. Liz Truss said she would extend the UK's Rwanda asylum plan and increase the number of Border Force staff. More than 14,000 migrants have crossed the Channel on small boats so far this year. Meanwhile, the public is split on who would make a better Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. An opinion survey of 2,000 adults found 43% back the former Chancellor, compared to 36% for the Foreign Secretary. President Zelensky has called attacks on the Ukrainian city of Odessa blatant barbarism, days after a deal had been struck allowing for the export of grain from the country. Russia claims it hit a Ukrainian military boat in the port. Despite the attack, officials say preparations to resume grain shipments were continuing. The deal between Ukraine and Russia had been hailed as a breakthrough that would help ease increasing global food prices. A cabinet minister has warned that HS2 is a killer whale that could rip the arm off the next Prime Minister. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Kit Malthouse, told The Telegraph the rail project could cause problems for the next leader. He says it is making significant progress, but that an operation of that size takes sophisticated leadership and management. Pope Francis has left Rome for Canada on a pilgrimage of penance tour to apologise for the Church's role in the abuse of Indigenous children. He's expected to meet with Indigenous leaders and residential school survivors on his 5-day tour of the country. Between the 1880s and the 1990s, more than 150,000 Indigenous children were separated from their families and were starved, beaten and sexually abused. A state of emergency has been declared in part of California as a wildfire continues to rapidly spread near Yosemite National Park. The so-called Oak Fire has significantly grown in size since starting on Friday, but firefighters were still unable to get it under control 24 hours later. Kate Moss said she had to run away from a photo shoot after a man asked her to go topless when she was 15. In a rare, wide-ranging interview with BBC Radio 4 programme Desert Island Discs, the model touched on numerous issues such as her support for actor Johnny Depp during his recent trial. She also said she felt scapegoated by the media due to her drug use in the 1990s. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Deanna.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined here in the studio by our very own Paul Embry. We are here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, we'll be joined by an MP supporting Rishi Sunak and an MP supporting Liz Truss to discuss the latest developments as the leadership race hots up. Holidaymakers are being warned of yet another day of disruption at the port of Dover after 2 days of gridlock. We discuss what's behind the delays. And comedy legend John Cleese has slammed so-called woke culture for having a disastrous effect on the industry. We'll be talking to a comedian about the comments and where comedy is in 2022. But as ever, here on The Political Correction, we want to hear from you. And today we're asking about your favourite moments from political campaigns over the years. So if you want to get involved in the conversation and have your message read out on the show, then email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Well, the Conservative leadership race hots up as Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak vow to toughen controls on migration into the UK. The former Chancellor said he would tighten the definition of who qualifies for asylum and introduce a cap on refugee numbers. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said she would extend the UK's Rwanda asylum plan and increase the number of Border Force staff. During the week, Rishi Sunak said he'd put the UK on a crisis footing if he were to become Prime Minister. And Truss said that if she were to become Prime Minister, she would scrap or replace EU laws which hinder growth by the end of 2023. So, Paul, I'm sure as ever you're rubbing your hands together in glee that this leadership race is going on. But what have you made of some of the comments this week?
I think it's a little bit fractious still, isn't it? And I think that doesn't really go down well with the public. They don't like the personality clashes. They don't like the petty personal squabbling. They want politicians to concentrate on the issues. And I think, to be fair to the candidates, they are starting to do that a little bit more. I think in the early stages, it was all there was a lot of bloodletting, wasn't it? You know, it was very kind of personalised. They're getting into this debate, Deanna, about tax cuts, but I think they're missing the real problem of potentially a looming recession. instead of arguing on the territory of whether it's right to cut tax and how much we should cut tax by, and don't get me wrong, I'm in favour of targeted tax cuts for some of the poorest people in society, particularly those people who are more likely to spend straight away and therefore keep the economy going, hopefully. But the real question for me, how do you get real wages rising at the moment? It's not just about the narrow ground of tax cuts, it's about getting money into people's pockets, because if you don't do that, then you do risk the economy going under. You do risk us getting into a recession. So, you know, get real wages rising, increase the minimum wage. I would like to see both the candidates make that sort of commitment. Much better public sector pay deals. I don't think the ones that were imposed over the last few days were anything like good enough. So it's almost to me as if the main point is being missed. And, you know, the biggest issue facing this country at the moment economically is that potential recession. And I don't think either candidate has yet really addressed that point.
I just want to bounce back your point about the minimum wage. There's always a bit of a concern from business, though, isn't there, that when that minimum wage goes up, it is harder for businesses to balance the books if you're paying a higher figure for the same kind of input from your staff. And I certainly saw it when I used to work in hospitality. Whenever the minimum wage went up, if it was a really tough time, and hospitality, as we know, has had a really difficult few years, the only way they could balance it was by cutting people's hours, which surely doesn't really have the right effect, does it, for some of those lowest paid workers?
I think that, I mean, I remember, you know, when the Labour government came in 1997, and obviously in their manifesto was the commitment for a minimum wage. I remember at the time business and, dare I say, Tory politicians making those very arguments, saying, look, if you introduce a minimum wage at all, what you're going to do is you're going to increase the cost for business, you're going to cut their profit margins, because you're increasing their overhead, you're going to need to lay people off. And as a result of that, what we're going to see is high unemployment as a result of a minimum wage. And actually, we didn't see that at all. What we saw is minimum wage was introduced, millions of workers were taken out of poverty pay, and actually that gave a boost to the economy because it put money in people's pockets. People were more likely to spend that money. As a result of that, businesses were taking in more, the government was taking more in terms of tax revenue. I mean, look, I know that there sometimes comes a point where you do need to worry about costs on business. Of course, I don't want us to be uncompetitive, but I think there is real scope at the moment for increasing the minimum wage, and particularly when you look, as I said, at that overarching problem of a sluggish economy, an economy that could tip into recession if we're not careful. We get into that downward spiral of job losses and businesses going out of business. That would be much, much worse than any, you know, marginally increased cost on business in terms of a minimum wage, in my view.
Well, on the tax cuts point, I mean, that's why personally I do support tax cuts now, in the hope that it will help mitigate against any recession and actually see the economy growing. But anyway, Paul, I'm told we have our first guest ready, so I'm sure you can throw some of these questions at her, because right now, joining us live from Westminster is the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Thérèse Coffey. So, Thérèse, over to you first. Just give us a quick overview of why it is that you're backing Liz.
Well, good morning, Deanna, and to your viewers today. I've known Liz a long time, and she's one of my closest friends in politics. And it's not just for that reason, far from it. It's because I know that she has delivered, and she's been in the Cabinet since 2014. She's served in 5 different roles and was an Education Minister before there. And whatever you can say about Liz, she absolutely delivers. So more recently, in Foreign Secretary, she got Nazanin home. But as importantly, I know that she's got a bold economic plan to help families with cutting taxes for them, or to help them with the cost of bills, but also, to be cutting taxes for businesses so that we can get growth in our economy, because it's growth that's going to help us increase the tax yield and make sure that we can continue to honour the 2019 manifesto, which Boris won with a huge majority, and as well as getting ready to make sure that we win the next general election. So I think Liz is the real deal, trusted to deliver, ready to lead, and that's why I'm backing her.
Thérèse, one bit of critique that Liz has been getting for her tax cuts policy from some leading economists are concerns that it might actually be inflationary and add to some of those rising prices that people are seeing across our country. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think there's a variety of things that's going on with inflation, the aftershock of COVID, so global supply chains are still not back in the place that they are. And of course, there has been some aspect impact, particularly on energy, with the effect of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Liz is leading the way in standing up to Putin and other elements like that. But talking of economists and their views on tax cuts and inflation. I think frankly, we see a lot of economists opine in different ways about this. I believe she's got a credible plan in terms of needing to boost growth, and that's by boosting investment and attracting more investment into this country, and that's the way that we are going to be able to grow our economy rather than go backwards.
A question now from Paul Embry.
Yeah, Ms Coffey, I mean, I don't know if you heard our previous discussion, but in terms of getting growth into the economy, it can't just be about cutting income tax, can it? Many experts will say, look, the quickest way to get growth is actually through public spending on public works, and you can, create the jobs that are necessary to increase your tax revenues and so on, and to increase prosperity and growth. And part of that, of course, is getting real wages rising. It seems to me that neither of the candidates have actually got a plan for getting real wages rising. How is Liz Truss going to do that? What is her plan? Does she have one?
Well, I think Liz is clear that we need to make sure we get a grip on inflation. That has certainly been spiking, which is leading to those bill hikes. But importantly, we need to make sure that we continue to fill the vacancies we have. That's one of my current roles as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. We've already, in just five months of this year, got over 500,000 people into work. And it's important that we try and unlock the potential of people in Britain, and so that we can make sure that we are servicing that demand for jobs, but also the demand for services, and get people spending again and boosting our economy. But I think what Liz did when she was the Trade Secretary, of course it's about doing trade deals, but as importantly, it's about getting inward investment into this country. She's got a great track record on that, but the key thing is about delivery, making sure that we remove ineffective regulations that are holding Britain back. And I'm keen that we take advantage of the Brexit opportunities, including aspects of unlocking investment from pension funds and similar. So we need to get a grip, get a move on, and make sure that we are looking to grow. And I believe that's, as I say, the package that Liz is presenting on our economic plan is credible, and she wants to hit the ground running from day one.
You talked there, Thérèse, about unlocking potential. Clearly, the manifesto in 2019 was all about levelling up and making sure some of those parts of the country, like my own constituency in Bishop Auckland, really do get those levelling up opportunities so that kids growing up there know they can get on in life without having to flee to the big cities. What is Liz's plan for levelling up, making sure that parts of the country, like the North East, etc., do have those opportunities moving forward?
Well, Liz is a lady of the union. She grew up in Paisley, lived in Leeds. She really wants to get that prosperity right around the country. And that's building on what we have done, set out with our levelling up. But I think a lot of this is about delivery, making sure that we get spades in the ground. And we've seen some great examples of that already, but about unlocking and streamlining what we can do so that we get that acceleration of activity in order to make sure that the growth comes through. I know Liz is setting out a longer-term plan, but she's absolutely clear that we need to see change quickly. That's why she wants to have this bold economic reform, where she's going to be helping families with the cost of living, but also cutting taxes in order to stimulate and boost growth.
And you mentioned about Brexit opportunities as well in one of your earlier answers. Liz, of course, did vote for Remain, and we've heard Rishi Sunak this week saying that he's the only true credible Brexiteer candidate. Is he right?
I believe that Liz is a truly credible candidate. You could show that by the delivery that she's done when she was Trade Secretary. And I think, can I say, people around her, absolutely, who were very much part of the Vote Leave campaign, are backing her because they believe that she will deliver. Since we've left the European Union, it's been, dare I say it, a bit of a slow pace in taking full advantage of the opportunities. That's why Boris, as Prime Minister, put in place Brexit Opportunities Minister, David Frost, followed by Jacob Rees-Mogg. And it's important that all of government grasps that opportunity. There are some regulations about what you can do with a Hoover or something like that. Some of the regulations that we had in Europe seem to favour one particular company over another. But nevertheless, I can see whether it's the financial regulations where we want to unlock investment funds, being quicker and more, accelerating that unlocking will certainly help bring money into making sure that we get the necessary infrastructure that can really help every part of the country, whether it's the North East where you're an MP or indeed South West. It's important that we get on with that job, and Liz's track record of delivery is really an important part of her agenda.
Thanks, Secretary of State. And one final question, not about the leadership race, but you talked there about infrastructure, and clearly we're seeing awful scenes coming out of Dover at the moment with incredible queues from people trying to get on their holidays or for other reasons, for business reasons, into mainland Europe. We've heard from French MPs that they're sort of blaming it directly on Brexit, but actually from British MPs that this is down to the French not adequately staffing their border force. Who's right?
Well, Liz has been very clear with the French government that we need to make sure that these delays are not repeated, in terms of this is not fair on holidaymakers. And so both sides particularly need to get a grip of that flow of traffic. And I know that Liz has already reached out and will continue that activity when she's Prime Minister. You know, from a personal experience, I've been in France, I've been in Portugal. There are definitely smoother ways to get this done, and it's important that everybody steps up to the plate so that holidaymakers are not stranded on the outskirts of Folkestone and Dover, but indeed getting on with their holidays, and that's what Liz wants to make achieve.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time this morning. The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Thérèse Coffey, on why she is backing Liz Truss to be leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Come on then, Paul. What did you make of Therese's comments?
Well, it will surprise you to learn that I wasn't entirely convinced, Deanna.
I'm shocked that a Tory didn't convince you. It's bizarre, right?
Of course you are. No, I just think, look, there are big economic problems in our country, as I touched on at the top of this show. We have still got a big gap between rich and poor in this country. Wealth and power are still concentrated in too few hands. We've still got boardroom excesses, we've still got regional inequalities, we've got people struggling to make ends meet, we've got millions of people working in the gig economy, in precarious, insecure, transient employment. We've experienced deindustrialisation in this country on a massive scale over recent years, and that's not a party political thing. I think that's happened under both parties, frankly. And it just seems to me that no politicians really... I think a lot of our politicians are what I call tinkerers. They sort of tinker at the margins without having a really big kind of macroeconomic plan of what it's going to take to make this country more productive, more competitive, more fair, close the gap between rich and poor, create thousands of good, solid blue-collar jobs up and down the country, really level up in a serious way. And nothing I've heard from the candidates suggests that they've really got an idea of how to go about that, in my view.
Well, one of the policies that I know Liz Truss is pushing, because it's no surprise to viewers at home that I'm a Liz Truss supporter, are these economic investment zones whereby different parts of the country that perhaps have struggled to attract business investment could maybe set their own tax rates, have slightly lower taxation, have easier planning policy. Would you support something like that?
I think there's a danger that actually by attracting it in one, like with free ports, attracting that particular trade and business in one area simply takes it away from another area, rather than having a broader proposal for making the whole country, frankly, more competitive and more productive. But I'm open-minded in terms of any ideas that might work to create, as I said, thousands of good, solid, secure jobs in our disadvantaged communities. Because the truth is, we've got parts of this country, post-industrial, provincial parts of this country, that have experienced that serious deindustrialisation. They've seen factories closed, they've seen jobs shipped abroad, and those jobs and industries have simply not been replaced. And, you know, we've got people working, as I said, in insecure employment, people working as delivery drivers, people working in call centres. And by the way, I'm not in any way, you know, criticising that. Good luck to those people. But a lot of these jobs are not secure. A lot of these jobs are temporary. People working 0 hours contracts and so on. So we need a much broader plan, I think, for reindustrialising this country. It can be done. I don't accept the argument it can't be done. You look at some of our competitors like Japan and Germany, they have a much better, more thriving manufacturing sector, industrial base.
And a more productive not a more productive workforce, but certainly a more productive economy anyway. More
productive economy. I think part of that is due to the exchange rate. I think because of the high value of the pound over many years, we're fundamentally uncompetitive. So these big macroeconomic issues, I don't think the candidates are particularly particularly addressing. But I have to say, I don't think the Labour Party is addressing it either, to be perfectly honest. So, as I say, it's not a party political thing. I think politicians have abdicated a lot of their responsibility on some of this stuff over recent years and have said, well, we'll pass matters of interest rates to bankers because the technocrats are more expert than we are, and we'll outsource everything, and we'll pass public services to private companies to run. I think that's an ideological problem that we haven't addressed properly.
Well, you're going to get a chance to quiz Richard Holden later, of course, who is on to talk about why he's backing Rishi Sunak. And after that, once we've spoken to both, I'm going to get your view of who you would most like to see as Prime Minister and who you think would be the biggest threat to the Labour Party. So it could be two very different answers there. But we want to hear from you at home. Let us know your thoughts on the two leadership contenders. Who are you backing? Who are you unsure about? What are the key issues that are on your mind that you feel they need to address? But coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the Dover delays and what has been behind the days of gridlock. But as ever, we do want to hear from you here on The Political Correction. And today we're asking, what are your favourite moments from political campaigns over the years? Let us know. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. Holidaymakers are being warned of yet another day of disruption at the Port of Dover and the Channel Tunnel after 2 days of gridlock, with the UK and France arguing over who is to blame. Here's what the Secretary of State for Wales, Robert Buckland, said to GB News earlier.
It does seem that there have been personnel problems with French customs, which have delayed things even more. It's always a very busy time of year as the school holidays start, and therefore I think it's very important that the French authorities work closely with our British counterparts to make sure they've got the staff levels necessary to deal with the number of people that are going on their holidays or indeed going about their normal business through the short straits of Dover-Calais.
Well, the French MP for Calais, Pierre-Henri Dumont, claimed the chaos is down to increased passport checks after Brexit, saying because of Brexit, we need to have more checks on passports, so this is what your future will look like for years to come if you take no action. Come on, Paul, is that a fair assessment, or do the French need to take a bit of responsibility for this as well?
I think they do. I think it's pretty clear they didn't have enough passport officers in place, and my understanding is that they can relax the checks if they wish to do so, but perhaps they wish not to do so. So you do have to wonder if there's some, political gamesmanship going on there. I mean, all in all, it's an appalling situation. You've got families who are trying to get away for a hard-earned holiday. Some of them may not have been on holiday since before the pandemic, actually. It may be their first holiday since the beginning of the pandemic. And, having to sit in queues and possibly turn back when they've been looking forward to that and they've saved up hard for it, I think is a terrible situation. And they don't particularly want to hear politicians squabbling about it. They don't particularly want some sort of war over was it Brexit or wasn't it Brexit. I mean, look, we weren't in the Schengen area anyway, so there was always border controls. It's nothing new to have those border controls. I guess it's just a question of whether or not the French, as I said, have not supplied enough passport officers and are being, shall we say, a little bit too rigorous in terms of their checks. But it's heartening to hear today that the situation is improving, because it certainly needs to, for the sake of those families who have been caught up in it.
Yeah, I do find it interesting, your point there about the sort of political squabbling. This seems to happen more and more over kind of Brexit, the Brexit debate, doesn't it? And I think particularly from some of those French politicians on this, blaming the whole thing on Brexit. Of course, there may be more checks, but you're quite right, we weren't in Schengen anyway. No, there were always some checks at the border, but it seems to me that this is more of a logistical problem than anything else.
Yeah, and I think we need... I'm a pro-Brexiteer, but, I certainly wouldn't say there have been no bumps in the road, or there never will be any further bumps in the road as a result of Brexit. I think we need to have an honest assessment about that. And I think if there are problems that occur inside of our country which are clearly attributable to Brexit, then let's have an honest discussion. But equally, let's put that discussion in context. I mean, what some people seem to be saying over this is, well, this is all due to Brexit and this shows why we were wrong. Well, to me, the idea that we should have decided to stay in a political and economic institution that we felt was not working for us, simply because of this temporary situation at Dover, I think debases the debate, actually. I mean, I voted Brexit for a huge number of reasons. I took the traditional left-wing position on Brexit. I felt the EU was far too pro-privatisation, pro-austerity. I didn't like free movement, the impact that had had on wages in certain sectors. I didn't like the Stability and Growth Pact and the implications for the economy in terms of that. So the much broader questions, I think the fundamentals for me haven't changed in terms of Brexit. I mean, I've got no buyer's remorse at all. I think we were right to leave. And it seems to me that some people are just picking up every single difficulty that comes along and says, that's to do with Brexit, that's why you were wrong. And I think, as I say, that debases the debate for me.
And often things that are nothing to do with Brexit. So some of the economic difficulties we've had, many of which have been caused by the pandemic, which has hit economies all over the world. So many people attributing all of that to Brexit as well, just to kind of feed their own Remainer argument.
And you hear people tweeting stories where they've had to, some kind of middle-class Remain supporting professional who's trying to go skiing to Switzerland and has to wait an extra half hour at the check-in desk or something. It seems to me that, making those sorts of comments probably betrays the fact that those people still don't realise why people voted for Brexit in the first place. If you were an average working-class person from Mansfield, and all of the ranks of the establishment, which you saw as largely responsible for your predicament in terms of low wages and lack of investment in your community and a lack of democracy, etc., were saying this is why you must vote for Remain, you were more likely to vote Leave for those reasons, because it was a kickback at the UK establishment. And it seems to me that some people in the upper echelons of our society, particularly those sort of middle-class Remain voters in London, still haven't understood that message.
It does make me wonder if they will ever accept the results.
They will never reconcile themselves to it, ever.
Absolutely. Well, let's go now to our guest, the travel journalist Simon Calder, who's there in Dover. Simon, tell us what is actually going on the ground at the moment.
Okay, actually, I'm now in London. I have been in Dover. I was cycling around the sunlit uplands of East Kent, seeing what was going on. But what I was specifically doing, and I'm afraid I'm going to do a bit of political correction, because some of the ideas that this is all the French and they could just wave us through, that is absolutely not the case. And it's quite interesting that, well, the government will be delighted with this headline from the front page of the Sunday Times: French insistence on passport stamp causing holiday chaos. British insistence on passport stamp causing holiday chaos is actually the reality. Can I just actually spell things out? I absolutely accept that the UK voted to leave the EU. I absolutely accept that being in favour of Brexit is a perfectly legitimate political choice, and I recognise that. But it has consequences. Leaving the EU makes it much harder to leave the UK, and that's because we asked, we voted, we negotiated, or at least the government did on our behalf, to have a European Union external frontier in Kent, at the port of Dover, before you get on the ferry to go to Calais and Dunkirk, and at the Eurotunnel terminal at Folkestone. And those are gummed up. And I went along to see exactly how gummed up they were. And effectively, I went and timed how long it took. Now, previously, when we were in the EU but not in Schengen, which I absolutely agree, all that the French passport control person could do was look at your passport, have a look at the photo, and check it was you. They couldn't do anything else at all apart from establish that was your identity. Okay. Very often they didn't, and they would just wave us through. And if things got difficult and the queue built up, they would just be waving us through like mad. We asked for that to come to an end. We said we want to be treated as third country nationals, whereupon immediately the French are obliged, as the first frontier that we reach in Europe, they are obliged to get everybody's passport and stamp it. They're also actually obliged to do far more, and they are not doing that at the moment, which is to check, for example, that you've not spent more than 90 days in the last 180 days by looking at all your passport stamps. They are supposed to check that you've got a ticket out of the EU, that you've got accommodation, that you've got enough money. We asked for those things because we knew they existed, because we formulated those rules when we were members of the EU. So anybody who says, and look, for a start, the French certainly didn't send enough people over first thing Friday morning. That was a disaster. But anybody who says, oh, they're taking it out on us, they're taking especially long time to punish us, that is absolutely not the case.
Thanks, Simon. Paul?
Simon, Tony Smith, and I've got a copy of his piece in the Sunday Telegraph today.
Yeah.
He's a former Director General of the UK Border Force, and he says in this morning's Telegraph, like us, EU border agencies have authorities to reduce certain checks in the wake of significant operational pressure upon the control should they choose to do so. Therefore, the argument that these delays would never have happened if the UK had remained in the EU does not stand up to scrutiny. Is Tony Smith wrong?
Well, yes, he is, I'm afraid. He says that, he also says in that article, which is quite remarkable, he says that Brexit is not, that the transactional changes are not significant. They jolly well are. I stood there and timed how long it took. If you've got two people in a car, 45 seconds, they could get that stamping process done. If it was a family of four, it was more like a minute and a half, and the average car has 3.5 people in. I talked to the boss of the Port of Dover, and he said, yes, transaction times are about 3 times what they were. So, of course, queues build up. And to pretend otherwise, as Tony Smith, former boss of UK Border Force, does, I'm afraid, does nobody any service. We have to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And unfortunately, because we never, in the whole planning of the transport system of the port set up in Kent, never imagined that we would have an external EU frontier there. It simply can't cope. Yes, we could put things in place that would make it more manageable, but I'm afraid to say, as so many people have done this morning, Mark Spencer, Leader of the House, says there's a very obvious solution, that you boost the number of people that are in the role of police aux frontières, the French border force. Well, yes, except there's nowhere to put them. There really isn't. You go along to Dover and have a look and say, OK, yeah, we can put an extra 20 border control kiosks there. There's no room.
Thanks, Simon. So we've spoken about the kind of car crossings, but what about airports? Because we are seeing some very dramatic scenes from all over the country, including, you know, luggage all over the shop in Heathrow. Is the situation easing? Is it as bad as the media are reporting? Give us an overview.
Yeah, things are getting easier. This is always the peak weekend, whether you are talking about driving across to continental Europe or flying away. And that's simply because it's when the English and Welsh schools break up, and that puts immense pressure on. So far, things are going pretty well. They're going pretty well because the airports, particularly the biggest ones, Heathrow and Gatwick, have put on caps. Heathrow, number of passengers who can go through. Gatwick, the number of planes that can take off and land. So fortunately, things so far are getting being fairly smooth. You know, there'll always be some delays and disruption, and it wouldn't surprise me if by the end of today we had some really quite serious delays, because of course stuff happens during the course of a day in aviation, but things aren't too bad. The luggage situation is still dreadful, and anybody who can just take cabin baggage only, honestly, you will be doing yourself such a favour. It's not, you're not going to have to queue up and drop off the bag. There's no chance of it being left behind at the airport or sent to somewhere random on the other side of the earth. And then when you get to the far end, you'll be able to make a quick getaway and start enjoying your holiday, which of course is what we should be doing.
Brilliant. Well, Simon, thank you so much for your insights and that top tip there about, if you can, only travelling with hand luggage, which I'm sure many of our viewers at home will find helpful if they are jetting off. Simon Calder there, travel journalist. Now, on to another story that I know caught Paul's eye. A woman campaigning to become a mayor in London was recently fired from her job for telling voters in an election leaflet that she believed in marriage between men and women. The housing association where she worked claimed her campaign pledge to promote heterosexual marriage was discriminatory, and she was subsequently sacked from her job. In a recent interview, Maureen said she was devastating, adding that we either have freedom of speech in the UK or we do not. So, Paul, this one caught your eye. It's mad, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely crazy, and I think it's chilling, actually, that an ordinary woman can stand for public office in her community. And most of her campaign, by the way, I think she stood for the Christian People's Alliance, but most of her campaign was around the usual stuff such as housing and the environment and so on. And she just argued in her election leaflet, she made a short statement saying that she believed that the traditional form of marriage between a man and woman was the best form and the best form in which to raise children. And she's effectively being sacked for that. And I just find it incredibly disturbing. And by the way, no one's saying that that belief should somehow be protected from criticism or ring-fenced from scrutiny. People are perfectly entitled to disagree with her view. And as a candidate in an election, they're perfectly entitled to challenge her and to take her to task on it. Equally, she's entitled to express that view, as far as I'm concerned. And the idea that an employer can come along, even though all of this was done outside of work time, and say, because you defend the concept of traditional marriage, your job and livelihood has gone, I think is absolutely outrageous. I think there's a wider question of how, you know, social and cultural norms, positions that until fairly recently were well established in this country and entirely uncontroversial, are now almost unsayable. I think things are changing at such a rapid rate in that regard. And as a trade unionist, I absolutely defend the principle that people shouldn't lose their jobs simply for expressing a genuinely held political belief, which is what this woman has done. And I think there should be a response. I think there should be a response from church groups, because she was standing for the Christian People's Alliance. I think there should be a response from the trade union movement and the general public, actually, because this sort of thing is tyranny. It's not democratic, it's not fair, it's not free, it's tyranny.
Well, speaking of freedom, let's bring in the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. Toby, what did you make of this?
Well, I can't say I was shocked because we come across cases like this at the Free Speech Union on a weekly basis. Someone says something that offends a group of people in the workplace or just some people on Twitter, and they deluge the employer with complaints. And instead of properly investigating the matter, the employer, wanting a quiet life, just gets rid of the person in question. We recently had to go to bat for a guy called Jeremy Sleeth, who worked as a conductor for West Midlands trains when Freedom Day happened on July 19th last year, and all the COVID restrictions were lifted and the pubs reopened. He said on his personal Facebook account, "Thank God for that. I didn't want to live in a Muslim alcohol-free caliphate for the rest of my life." I mean, I think he was making a joke, not a brilliant joke, but nonetheless not something that means he should have his livelihood ended. But nonetheless, colleagues complained. He was investigated and eventually dismissed for gross misconduct. We helped him take West Midlands trains to the Employment Tribunal, and he eventually got a finding of unfair dismissal. And I know that the Christian Legal Centre is representing Maureen Martin, and I imagine they'll be equally successful because under the Equality Act 2010, expressions of religion or belief are protected. So you cannot be fired for expressing an orthodox Christian view. However distasteful some colleagues of yours or people on Twitter might find it. So I expect that she'll also win, but it's a huge hassle to have to take your employer to the Employment Tribunal. I mean, it can take up to 2 years to get a hearing in the Employment Tribunal, and you need some resources, you need some expertise. Without the Christian Legal Centre, I don't think she'd be able to do this. We need to stop employers reacting in this way to Twitter mobs demanding that employees be fired. I quite agree with Paul. I think this is an issue that trade unions should take up. One of the things the Free Speech Union is campaigning for is an amendment to the Employment Rights Act 1996 to make it impossible for employers to sack employees who say something outside the workplace. That was the case in Jeremy Sleeth's case, and that was the case for Maureen Martin too. If you say something in a purely private capacity or in your capacity as an electoral candidate, as Maureen Martin did, and has no relationship to your employment status, you're not saying it wearing your hat as an employee, the employer should not be able to punish you for that in any way. And another thing we want to try and get changed is to put a statute of limitations on what people can be investigated for. At the moment, colleagues of some people are going back years to try and find things that are supposedly offensive in order to try and get that person disciplined or sacked. We want a 12-month statute of limitations on what you can be investigated for saying in the workplace to try and stymie the offence archaeologists. We need stronger protections for employees and for their speech rights.
Thanks, Toby. Paul?
Toby, yeah, I'm heartened to hear about the campaign to amend the Employment Rights Act. I mean, as a trade unionist, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. Just tell us a little bit, if you can, briefly about the form that campaign is taking. Are you lobbying MPs? Have you got lawyers on board who have said, this is viable, this could be doable? Have you spoken to other trade unions? Are they likely to support it? I'm sceptical on that final point, I have to say.
We haven't yet reached out to any other trade unions, but it is a straightforward workers' rights issue. And one of the original reasons, as you know, Paul, for the creation of trade unions in the 19th century was to provide better protection for workers so they could speak out against their employers, criticise their working conditions without risking the sack. So it's absolutely in the trade union tradition to stand up for workers' rights. We've got a lawyer drafting the amendment. We're running a campaign at the moment encouraging Conservative Party members to write to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss asking them to support that amendment to the Employment Rights Act. We've done some polling on it and found overwhelming support amongst the general public for such an amendment. If anyone wants to help us with this campaign, if you're a member of the Conservative Party and you're watching this, there's a tool on our website, freespeechunion.org, which enables you to email Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss asking them to pledge to protect workers' speech rights by amending the Employment Rights Act 1906.
There we go.
And we're hoping that at least one of them will commit to it.
Brilliant. Sorry to wrap up quickly, Toby. That's all we've got time for, but thank you for that. And I'm sure many of our viewers will be getting on board with that campaign. Well, stick with us, because coming up after the break, we are talking about a recent review into antidepressants. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Political Correction. Well, last week on our show, we were joined by Baroness Claire Fox, who spoke about different ways schools should approach mental health and the overprescription of drugs. Well, linked to that, this week, a major review was released which found no clear evidence that low serotonin levels were responsible for depression and called into question the widespread use of antidepressants. The study's lead author, Joanna Moncrief, said that many people take antidepressants because they've been led to believe their depression has a biochemical cause. But this new research suggests this belief is not grounded in evidence. Well, we're delighted to say that Joanna joins us now. Joanna, thank you for your time this morning. Just give us a very quick overview of your findings.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Yes, so we did a review of the evidence from all the main research areas that have looked at connections between serotonin and depression. We looked at research on serotonin receptors, for example, research on serotonin levels and genes that code for aspects of the serotonin system. And we found that none of the evidence from any of those areas provided convincing evidence that there is low serotonin in people with depression, or that low serotonin or that lowering serotonin can induce depression in people who don't already have it. And this is important because obviously people have been told for a long time that depression is or might be caused by low serotonin levels, and that has been the justification that has been given to many people for the use of antidepressants.
So I guess my question, Joanna, is how has it taken so long for this to be kind of found, given, you know, antidepressants have been commonplace for so many people for such a long time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It has been known that the evidence is inconsistent and not convincing for many years, but no one has got all the evidence together in this way in order to be able to, get a sort of full overview of the area. I think that's partly because there's been a reluctance really to confront the issue because antidepressants are commonly used and they were heavily promoted by the pharmaceutical industry, of course, back in the 1990s and the noughties. And so I think there's been a reluctance to burst that bubble. But it's really important, obviously, that people know that belief is not grounded in evidence, is not supported. There are a lot of people who assume that antidepressants must be correcting some sort of underlying chemical abnormality, and therefore, if it's not low serotonin, we just haven't found it yet, it must be something else. But there are other ways that antidepressants could be having effects. We know they have a substantial placebo effect, for example, and we also know that they change brain chemistry, and they have some effects on mental activity and emotions, and they seem to numb emotions a bit, which may be one of the ways that they help people who are very sort of acutely unwell. But if they work in this way, if they have work through the placebo effect or by numbing emotions a bit, that obviously has hugely different implications from if they act by correcting some underlying abnormality. So that's why I think it's so important that people know about this research so they can make a properly informed decision about whether they want to take an antidepressant or not. And I should just say that if anyone listening is on an antidepressant and is reconsidering their treatment in the light of this, it's very important not to stop your medication suddenly. It's important that it's brought down slowly and gradually, because we know that people can experience withdrawal effects when they stop taking antidepressants.
Thank you, Joanna. Paul?
Joanna, just following on from that last question, actually, has it, in your view, I don't know if you can comment on this, has it become an easy option for GPs who are under constant pressure with longer waiting lists and so on, just to prescribe antidepressants rather than getting to the real root of someone's particular mental health or emotional condition? Just say, here's a bottle of pills, be on your way, let's get the next patient in. Is there a bit of that going on, do you think?
Good point, Paul. I think that is part of what's going on. The idea that depression is a chemical imbalance has become a cultural myth. So, everyone believes it and accepts it. And therefore people who are feeling down, feeling low, feel that the right thing to do is to go to their doctor and ask about antidepressants. People have been encouraged to do that. And as you say, it's easier for the doctor to prescribe a pill than to try and go into all the complicated things that might be happening in someone's life that might be making them feel unhappy. But having said that, I should mention that the National Institute for Health and Social Care Excellence, the NICE Institute that produces guidelines on treatment, has recently recommended lots of other things that people can do if they're feeling, if they have depression, including exercise, which is very good for lifting mood, and various forms of therapy and other things. So there is some acknowledgement that there are other ways to deal with this, and that taking antidepressants may not always be the most appropriate one.
Well, thank you for your insights today, Joanna. Joanna Moncrief, there, Professor of Critical and Social Psychiatry at UCL, talking about her new research into the effectiveness of antidepressants. Now, firefighters have warned that last week's wildfires were a wake-up call for Britain after huge flames broke out across the country, damaging and destroying homes. Firefighters in London faced their busiest day since World War II, taking 2,670 calls compared to around 500 on a busy day. Paul, I want to come to you on this to kind of draw on your experience as a firefighter and, colleagues and friends of yours who still are kind of active. It must have been a really horrendous day.
It was brutal for firefighters in that situation. I mean, not just the heat, but obviously wearing full fire gear, in many cases working for hours and hours, an incident, these wildfires. 15 major incidents declared by local authority fire and rescue services up and down the country. And the truth is, the point needs to be made that actually firefighters are doing this stuff now with one hand tied behind their backs, because the level of cuts that have been imposed on the fire and rescue service over the last decade or more is scandalous. We've seen something like 1 in 5 frontline firefighter posts go since 2010, 12,000 frontline firefighter posts. We've seen scores of fire stations closed. We've seen hundreds of fire engines being taken out of action. And of course, that's had the impacts of longer response times. It means that firefighters are now taking longer to get to a fire, and that comes with an increased life risk to the public. And this really needs highlighting, because it hasn't been highlighted enough. And what really angers me is firefighters have just been offered 2% by the National Fire Service employers as their annual pay increase. When you look what firefighters have done, they carried on working throughout the pandemic. They're dealing with these incidents now more and more. And to say to them, all you're worth this year is 2%, I think is absolutely inexcusable. So there's a perfect storm at the moment in the fire service, where there's a lot of anger and low morale as a result of the cuts that have taken place and the lack of decent pay awards. And all of that, I think, is going to come to a head quite shortly.
And there's speculation that these sort of extreme weather incidents may continue or even increase. Is that a concern for the fire service at the moment?
It's certainly a concern if you don't have sufficient resources to be able to deal with it. And firefighters are adaptable. I mean, firefighters will go to any emergency where they can render assistance. I know that from personal experience, and firefighters will always want to help. But what they get really angry about is if they believe they're not being given the tools to do the job. And increasingly over recent years, with the savage cuts that have been imposed, and we saw it really in the early part of this week where services were stretched to breaking point, that really needs to be addressed urgently.
Well, certainly a harrowing week, seeing some of the scenes coming out of the areas that have been the most badly affected. But that's it now for the first hour of the show. Keep those views coming in. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews, and we will get to them just after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up this hour, we're joined by Richard Holden MP to find out why he is backing Rishi Sunak to be the Prime Minister. Should Boris Johnson get a peerage? A new poll says plenty of Conservative voters think so. And we'll talk about the considerable rise in people choosing to go private for their healthcare on the back of NHS waiting times. That plus plenty more after the latest news with Tamsin.
Deanna, thank you. Good morning. It's 11 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Roads to the port of Dover are reportedly flowing normally after 2 days of disruption, causing chaos for travellers and lorry drivers. Officials at the port say they've worked around the clock to clear both freight and tourist traffic in Dover after 2 days of chaos. British authorities said they've received strong support from their French border colleagues to clear the backlog of more than 200 miles worth of traffic. Additional checks on the border post-Brexit and understaffing of French officials had been blamed for the delays, which saw delays of up to 18 hours for some travellers. But Simon Calder says the reality of the situation is different.
Because some of the ideas that this is all the French and they could just wave us through, that is absolutely not the case. And it's quite interesting that, the government will be delighted with this headline from the front page of the Sunday Times. French insistence on passport stamp causing holiday chaos. British insistence on passport stamp causing holiday chaos is actually the reality.
Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have vowed to toughen controls on migration as part of their bids to become next Tory leader and Prime Minister. Mr Sunak said he would tighten the definition of who qualifies for asylum and introduce a cap on refugee numbers. Liz Truss said she would extend the UK's Rwanda asylum plan and increase the number of border force staff. More than 14,000 migrants have crossed the Channel on small boats so far this year. Meanwhile, the public is split on who would make a better Prime Minister. An opinion survey of 2,000 adults found 43% back the former Chancellor, compared to 36% for the Foreign Secretary. This is in contrast to Conservative Party members, where a YouGov poll has placed Liz Truss 24 points ahead of Rishi Sunak. President Zelensky has called attacks on the Ukrainian city of Odessa blatant barbarism, days after a deal had been struck allowing for the export of grain from the country. Russia claims it hit a Ukrainian military boat in the port. Despite the attack, officials say preparations to resume grain shipments were continuing. The deal between Ukraine and Russia had been hailed a breakthrough that would help ease increasing global food prices. A cabinet minister has warned that HS2 is a killer whale that could rip the arm off the next Prime Minister. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Kit Malthouse, told The Telegraph the rail project could cause problems for the next leader. He says it is making significant progress, but that a project of that size takes sophisticated leadership and management. A state of emergency has been declared in part of California as a wildfire continues to rapidly spread near Yosemite National Park. The so-called Oak Fire has significantly grown in size since starting on Friday, but firefighters are still unable to get it under control 24 hours later. Kate Moss said she had to run away from a photo shoot after a man asked her to go topless when she was 15. In a rare, wide-ranging interview with BBC Radio 4 programme Desert Island Discs, the supermodel touched on numerous issues, such as her support for actor Johnny Depp during his recent libel trial. She also said she felt scapegoated by the media due to her drug use in the 1990s. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching and listening to GB News. Now, as you know, here on The Political Correction, we're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, Conservative MP Richard Holden joins us here in the studio to tell us why he's #ready for Rishi. A new poll suggests swathes of 2019 Tory voters would support Boris Johnson being given a peerage. But does he deserve one when his last 5 predecessors have not received the honour? With a new report this week calling for radical measures to tackle drug deaths in Scotland, Scottish Parliament member Dr Sandesh Gulhane joins us to discuss the findings and what needs to be done. And tell us your favourite funny political campaign moments. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Well, after a jam-packed hour, loads of you have been getting in touch with us. We've got Peter here talking about the Tory leadership race and taxation. Raising the tax allowance is needed to help the lower paid. There also needs to be a reduction of the state and a reduction of corporation tax. It's growth of the private sector that we want, not the increasing of the bloated public sector. And I think Truss will deliver this. Paul.
Yeah, on the Dover blockage, Tony has no truck with the anti-Brexiteers. He says, I travelled to France for years and experienced long delays when we were in the EU. This is about proper management and anticipation of the demand on both sides of the channel. This weekend has meant extraordinary demand following the pandemic. This should have been foreseen, says Tony.
And then around sort of Tory leadership contenders, Maureen says, it seems to me that in the pursuit of net zero, the Tory government is deliberately burying its head in the sand about the obscene price hikes being foisted on us by the vehicle, fuel and energy companies.
And Mac, on the issue of the woman who was sacked for voicing her support for traditional marriage, Maureen Martins, Mac says Liberals continually preaching inclusivity, diversity and people's rights are the first to react negatively if you don't have the same views. Utter nonsense. I do think that's a legitimate point, actually. You know, people on the Liberal end of the spectrum are constantly talking about the importance of diversity. And yet when it comes to diversity of thought and opinion, all of a sudden they demand conformity. I think there's a real contradiction in their argument, which they've never addressed.
Quite right. Well, one you will like here, Paul, giving you a nice bit of praise. Teresa says, I think Paul gives a nice balanced view of politics. He has a nice voice to listen to without ranting. Just gets the points across, and I agree, big industry is needed. We've lost a lot of jobs with Pitt Steel and when Pitt's Steel and Manufacturing went, and they've never been replaced, so not as many paying into the system. Small businesses will never cover that. Please give Paul more time on GB News. He is a breath of fresh air. There you go, some extra hours for you, Paul.
A nice voice to listen to. I can sing as well if someone wants to give me the lyric. I'll give up.
Absolutely. Pick a song and we're all yours. Go on then, Paul, one more from you.
Yeah, one more. Carl says, we won't know for at least a decade whether or not Brexit has been a success or a disaster. I have absolutely no regrets having voted to leave. There are obvious benefits from having a more intimate relationship with our democracy and those that rule us. Other aspects like trade will be more difficult, mainly due to the awkwardness and resentment of the European Union.
Well, do keep your views coming in. We've got plenty more to get through. We will be reading out more later on in the show. But earlier in the show, we spoke to Liz Truss supporter Thérèse Coffey about Liz's plans for Britain. And I'm delighted to say that we are now joined in the studio by Conservative MP for North West Durham and Rishi Sunak supporter Richard Holden to put the case forward for Prime Minister Sunak. I can see your badge there, Richard.
Absolutely, I'm ready for Rishi. Certainly am.
You are. Come on then, give us an overview. Why is it that you're supporting Rishi?
Three things. Top one, Rishi was back Brexit all the way through. He's not a late convert. He was putting himself under real strain as a brand new MP in 2016 to really go and back it. Secondly, I think he's got a proper plan for the economy. Deal with inflation first, then move on to tax cuts, and I think that's a sensible way to go. It's a sort of way Mrs Thatcher had gone about it. And thirdly, as you can see from that poll earlier on, Deanna, I genuinely think Rishi Sunak is the best placed to take on Labour in the north of England and North Wales, Lib Dems down in the south of England, and also help our Scottish colleagues fight the SNP up there and stop breaking up the union.
Well, let's talk about polling first, because the polling inside the party at the moment isn't very good for Rishi. Are you worried?
I really think... so Rishi came up to North West Durham yesterday, literally a few miles from your own patch, actually, and went down really well with party members. What I found, actually, before that was a lot of people were really undecided. So a few people had definitely decided to go for Rishi, a few people definitely decided to go for Liz, but a lot of people still in the balance for them. So I think these TB debates over the next few days are going to be really crucial. And I also think that we want to see both candidates out and about in the country. We've seen both of them pushing forward some of their different policy agendas over the last few days. So I think we've got a bit more of that to go. And then in a week or two's time, people start, I think, settling down as to who they think is going to be best.
So let's talk about tax, because this is one of the big issues that's coming up between both candidates at the moment. You said there that you think Rishi's following a true sort of Thatcherite plan. But we've got the highest tax burden in around 70 years. Is that really a Thatcherite approach to taxation?
Well, I think what we've seen is having to deal with the pandemic issues, and we've got to pay for the NHS to get that COVID backlog sorted out. That's one of the biggest issues which affects so many of my constituents. So many people know somebody in their family or a friend who's on one of those NHS waiting lists at the moment. We've got to get that sorted. But I think the real issue we're all facing now is that price of inflation. You can see it in the shops. I know petrol's come off a little bit from its massive highs recently, but it's started to come down. But we've got to get that under control, because otherwise, to give a tax cut now all it's going to do is get eaten up by inflation. What I want to do is get that inflation sorted and then push tax cuts. And when Rishi has been able to do tax cuts, and he has done some recently, the big rise in a threshold for national insurance recently, he's always targeted it at working people and the lower paid, which is exactly what I want to see him doing in the future as well.
Well, just on corporation tax, if I may, back in 2015, Rishi, as a fresh-faced young MP, was in the chamber. He intervened on the Labour shadow Chancellor and said raising corporation tax would damage jobs and growth. And yet, as Chancellor, that's exactly what Rishi's planning to do.
But the flip side of that is Rishi's also put in a massive investment allowance, because one of the big issues you know and I know that we talk about all the time in Parliament is productivity. And what he said is you can avoid those increases if you really push cash into investment in the economy to help upskill some of those big manufacturing projects we're seeing just down the road from us in Teesside. If people invest in the UK, then they can avoid those tax hikes. And I think that's the sort of incentive we need to see business getting. And on the flip side of that, I'd also say, well, you know, look at what Liz was saying a few years ago. You know, she was arguing against any form of reduction in spending money on public services. And we can't, you know, and attacking the government for any form of reduction in that space. I think we've got to be realistic about those things and have a really balanced approach. And I think that's what Rishi's going to try and deliver.
See Paul edging to come in.
Sorry, Paul.
He wants his go.
One of the problems, I'd put the same point to Thérèse Coffey at the top of the show. There's potentially a looming recession in this country, and the real urgency for me is getting money into people's pockets and keeping the economy bubbling away so far as that's possible. Because if we don't do that, then frankly we may end up tipping into recession. Now, we can argue on the narrow territory of tax cuts, whether or not that's the best way to increase people's disposable income, to get them spending, to keep economic activity higher. But the real thing is getting real wages rising. The real thing is putting money into people's pockets through their wages. And it seems to me that actually neither candidate has got a real plan to address that. And if you look at the recent public sector pay settlements, I think that proves the point that there isn't any real commitment from the Tory party to get real wages rising. What is your candidate, Rishi Sunak, going to do to get wages rising in this country when people are really struggling to...
Oh, actually, Paul, you address the fundamental issue of all of this, and actually the issue facing not just our country but countries across the world. It's basically the only way you can get, in the long term, real wages rising is by increasing productivity. That's the thing that Rishi has really pushed forward on. It's been called a super deductor and all that sort of thing, but what it really is, it's about ensuring investment to enable productivity to rise. It's been absolutely the keystone of what is pushed over the last couple of years.
But you've got, the government, with respect, the government has got the power to improve the public sector pay settlements. It's got the power to increase the minimum wage. I think, and you're not doing any of it.
Well, that's fundamentally not true. The living wage has gone up quite substantially over the last couple of years.
It needs to go up more.
I don't know that, but you can only pay for that with productivity increases. And you can only pay for that with a thriving private sector productivity increase.
We can have a wealth tax on people like Rishi, the super rich in our society.
That's the big thing that we really need, is the productivity to grow. That's how you get the money back into the private sector, really delivering. And one thing I am really concerned about at the moment, and which would really drive us into recession, is if we saw interest rates rising, really hitting families, really hitting small businesses. So the average mortgage in the UK is about 120 grand. If we saw interest rates rise as... Liz Truss's senior economic advisor quoted in the papers over the last few days to 5%, 6%, 7%. That would see hundreds and hundreds of pounds more a month for every single household in the country. And that's a sure way to drive people into recession without increasing productivity at all. That's why I think dealing with inflation is so important, so we don't need to see those interest rate rises.
I agree on the question of interest rates. I don't want to see them rise. But the truth is, in terms of inflation, it's not being driven by wage demands. Wage demands over the last 10 years and wage settlements have been really, really low, and they're still low at the moment. The reason we've got inflation is because of external factors and the opening up of the economy after the pandemic, the situation in Ukraine, the energy situation.
I think we're in violent agreement on that, Paul.
Well, OK, well, let's see if we can go one step further then. Put more money into people's pockets with better public sector pay settlements and increase the national minimum wage and keep the economy, keep the economic activity going so we don't tip into recession with all of the problems that's going to cause.
We're in violent agreement on that, but the key thing that we have to do is to stop that inflation becoming embedded across the economy. That's when you would see inflation spikes, and that's what I think we need to avoid. That's why I think Rishi's plan is sensible. Of course I want to see public sector wages rise. My mum works in a local community hospital. I would like to see that, you know, her pay packet go up a bit. But I think we've got to see, in order to do that, we've got to get the private sector, productivity going, so that we can then push that money through the rest of the economy as well.
Do you think, Richard, that Rishi Sunak, as a fantastically wealthy man, and I'm not, using that as a stick with which to beat him, it's just a statement of fact, he's a fantastically wealthy man, can have, naturally, any empathy with people at the lower end of the scale in society who are really struggling to make ends meet, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to pay their mortgages and so on. He's just completely removed from the everyday lives of most people in this country, isn't he? No, I don't think so. Rishi Sunak was in Grantham yesterday, the birthplace of the grocer's daughter. We might disagree on the stuff about her, but he is a pharmacist's son from Southampton. They're not from actually vastly different backgrounds. What he's really concentrating on, and which is why it's so important, is this trying to tackle inflation, because that's what kills everybody in the country. That's what drives interest rates up. Now, when he's had the chance to do stuff in the economy, he has raised the threshold for the people paying national insurance. He's dropped the tax on fuel when he's had the chance to do that. Those are taxes which hit working-class people in constituencies like mine harder than anything else. So when it's come down to it, he's always targeted the support he can give on lower-paid workers. The working poor in Britain, and he's trying to make them wealthier rather than targeting tax cuts elsewhere. I trust him on that because I've also worked with him locally on a couple of particular things. One was a tax cut for motorhomes. The EU had put in this big tax rise in North West, which had hit in the UK, and that was a 705% increase in tax on new motorhomes. It was going to cost jobs in my constituency. And when I spoke to him about it, we went through the figures on it. He was like, this is totally wrong. It's going to cost jobs here in the UK. It's going to put even more pressure on wages here in the UK for workers in my constituency, and he got rid of it. And it's things like that, when you go to him with a proper plan, that he's prepared to listen and to enact it as well. So I'm confident that he not only understands, but is demonstrated to me on a local and a national level that he's on the side of working people. Now, he did marry somebody who's very wealthy, whose parents made a business from nothing to being incredibly successful. That's a fair point to make, and he gets that all the time. But when I see him interacting with my constituents yesterday in North West Durham, speaking to people on the shop floor at AA Flags in concert just a few weeks ago, he understands those people because he worked in his mum's small business when she was a pharmacist down in Southampton. I'll never forget the way that he looked at the sort of row of those box files you've got of accounts in a small business. I was chatting to that small business owner in concert and could totally empathise with exactly the pressures she was facing and the pressures of the people on the shop floor, because those are the people he worked with when he was growing up. We'll put you down as a don't know then, shall we?
Well, there's one thing I want to come back to you on, and this is around Brexit. Yep. Because it's a big issue that I know many of our viewers at home are very kind of passionate about. And you made the point there about Liz Truss's Brexit stance. But we're not here to talk about Liz, we're here to talk about Rishi. Yep. And Rishi's been getting some critique online this week for, claiming he was a big member of Vote Leave, but actually wasn't actually seen that much on the campaign. Tell us about that.
As far as I've seen a video of Rishi doing the Vote Leave stuff, there are plenty of videos online of the other side of Liz telling it would be a total disaster.
We're not talking about Liz, we're talking about Rishi.
I know why you don't want to talk about that, about Liz T. But no, Rishi was 100% supportive of it all the way through. Right? He was one of the few. You speak to people like Robert Jenrick, who were probably actually more on the Brexit side of the argument, but in the end got their arms twisted to support Remain back in the day. Rishi stuck to his guns as a brand new MP all the way through, and you know how difficult that is.
We both do.
We both do. We definitely do. And he stuck to his guns all the way through and was and really pushed on that. Obviously, he might not have been the face the campaign wanted. I think Boris is a bit more of a face of the campaign at those times. But he has been supportive of it all the way through. And the reason he's supportive of it, and the reason I back him on it, is because if you're supportive of it from the start, there's nobody who wants to make more of a success of it than somebody who's been with it every step of the way. And that's one of the reasons I think my constituents look at Rishi and think, you know what? He's been somebody who's been committed to this. We back Brexit. A lot of those Labour Leave voters in my constituency who voted for me for the first time in order to get Brexit delivered and to try and level up the north of England, they can trust him because he was with it from the start. And I'm just always a bit cautious of late converts to some of these causes. And I think Rishi, if anybody's going to try and get it delivered, it's going to be Rishi, number one for me.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, pretty decisive stuff. I'm curious, you know, we're going to have these TV debates, and this isn't directed at Rishi or Liz. This is just a general observation. It seems to be getting more and more attacky, doesn't it? Kind of both sides are really going at each other in a way that I certainly didn't want to see from that blue-on-blue perspective. Are you worried about that in the debates?
I actually think that what would have been probably quite helpful for the entire situation is if we'd only had the debates with the final two candidates, because until this stage, actually, it's people like you and me who are deciding going to get through to the final two. But I think the wider party in the country, they're not going to be able to meet these individuals face-to-face, most of them. So I think there is an element of having a TV debate between the two. I hope it can remain broadly civil, because I think, actually, in a lot of ways, they're coming from the same Conservative family and we're coming from the same place. I mean, while you and I might disagree on specific policies, I think broadly we're also wanting to do the best for our constituents and for the country, and coming up from a very broadly Conservative perspective as well. There are policy differences. And the policy differences about proposals for the future. So I hope the debate can be around the future and not around the positions they've taken in the past, because I think that's what people want to see. They want to see what's going to be laid out for the future of the country, and I hope both Liz and Rishi concentrate on that in the next few days. I think we've actually seen some sensible plans from both of them on delivering things to tackle immigration. And today we've seen both of them in the papers talking about that. They've obviously got a different economic stance, slightly different stance on trying to get the NHS backlogs down, and that's fine, and they should put those different views forwards. But I think broadly they're coming from the same place, so I hope it can be about looking to the future and remaining as civil as they can on that.
Because at the end of the day, we need to smash Labour at the next election, don't we?
Well, exactly. And
take you down.
And that's exactly why I'm backing...
More blue on blue, please. More blue on blue.
I'm sure you
have the next
do.
hour used to.
Well, Rick, thank
Brilliant.
you for your time this morning. Richard Holden, the MP for North West Durham, on why he is backing Rishi Sunak to be the next Prime Minister. Well, don't go anywhere, because coming up next, we'll discuss the outcome of a report into tackling drug abuse in Scotland. We'll look at why so many people are choosing to switch to private healthcare. And, again, we want to hear from you. What's your most memorable political campaign gaffe? Email us on gbviews at GBNews or tweet us at GBNews to tell us your favourite funny moments in politics. All that and more coming up.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction, and loads of you getting in contact with us. We've got Dave here with an interesting one. He says, Boris doesn't deserve a peerage, but Cameron does, because without him, there would be no Brexit. Paul?
Law of unintended consequences with Cameron, wasn't it? And David says the most deserving person for a peerage is GB News' very own Nigel Farage. Interesting one. There's been talk, hasn't there, of Nigel being proposed for one for years, but it's never quite happened.
Well, I've got another one. Yeah, no, it's. I think Nigel is definitely a favourite among some of our viewers at home for that. I've got, in response to the interview we just did with Richard Holden, Rick will love this one, I am sure. Corinne says, I think Richard Holden is deluded if he thinks Rishi Sunak will retain red wall voters. I'm a red wall voter who voted for Boris and Conservatives for the first time ever in 2019. I will never vote for backstabbing high-tax Rishi. So if he becomes PM, the Conservatives have lost my vote.
And Jennifer says Tony Blair got a knighthood. He caused massive problems with the changes he made to our country and laws, and the public hate him. Boris had a really hard time as PM and had everything thrown at him. His traitor colleagues will regret their decision to go against the public vote and will be destroyed at the polls if Sunak gets in. Boris for a knighthood, yes, as soon as possible, please. Jennifer.
Well, a nice final one to finish on, because I love feeding your ego on this show, Paul. Michael says...
Carry on.
I'd just like to say, as a Tory, how sensible Paul is. He always gives a level-headed answer. And that is why GB News is a fantastic place, because despite differing views, we can come together and recognise merit in debate, even when Paul is wrong. But do keep your views coming in. We'll try and get to some more later in the show. Now, the Scottish Drug Deaths Task Force have produced a final report giving recommendations and demanding action from the Scottish Government on tackling excess drug-related fatalities in the country. The report calls for more leadership, earlier intervention and better strategy and funding, amongst many other things. Well, joining us now to discuss the findings of the report is the Conservative MSP for Glasgow and Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, Dr Sandesh Gulain. Sandesh, thank you for joining us today. Just give us an overview of some of the key findings from this report.
I think the first thing we need to say about the report is that the former chair resigned and has called this report toothless and bland. And she's also called into question how independent this report is. Let's be absolutely clear. Drug deaths in Scotland is our national shame. We have the most, 1,339 people died for no reason in Scotland. And that is the most in Europe, and we have been the most in Europe for 2 years. 2 years. 5 times more than in England. And Nicola Sturgeon not only said she took her eye off the ball, but actually we're at the stage now where Nicola Sturgeon is now looking at some pretendy ref instead of worrying about people dying in our country. It's an absolute disgrace. And this report doesn't tell us anything that we didn't already know. Then a report that came out slightly earlier, and we got to debate in Parliament, told us that the medical assisted treatments, only 17% of those standards had been met. This is just an absolute disgrace. And all you hear from the SNP is we will learn lessons, we will learn lessons. And this is in a myriad of things. By now, they should be professors of absolutely everything to do, because simply they are not doing their job.
And what would the Scottish Conservatives do differently if you were in power with regards to drug deaths?
So we're already introducing a bill called the Right to Recovery. And look, I'm a practicing NHS doctor. I'm still working, and I see patients. And the problem that we've got with patients is there is a window. When somebody has a drug addiction, they have a window where something normally has happened and they've come in and say, I need help. And right now in the system, we just aren't able to give them the help that they need quick enough. And so the Right to Recovery bill that has been brought in by the Scottish Conservatives will tell people that they have a right in law to get the help when they want it and how they want it as well. And that's really important that we can do that and we can do it quickly, because when we lose that window of opportunity, people will go away from us.
Paul?
Sandesh, brief question from me. Do you favour the decriminalisation of cannabis?
So I think that it's very important that the people, and it's not just cannabis, I think the people who have a problem with drugs, we don't need to criminalise the people that are involved. But let's be absolutely clear.
I'm sorry, don't they criminalise themselves by taking illegal drugs?
They have an addiction. We need to medicalise people who are having a problem with drugs. But there are gangs, there are people supplying the drugs that are a horrible, horrible stain on our society. And those are the people we have to go after. Those are the people we have to really make sure that stop doing that, because they're not just doing drugs, they're doing other terrible crimes. And we need to stamp them out and put really harsh conditions. We need to really go for them.
And Sandesh, we're a little bit pushed for time, but I know there was another story that caught your eye as well, and that's a recent sort of breaking news around the Scottish Cricket Board.
Yeah, so here in Scotland, I mean, we've all seen what's happened in Yorkshire. And here in Scotland, the report is coming out showing that it probably is institutional racism within Cricket Scotland. The board has resigned whilst you have been on air over this. Look, I love cricket. I'm of Indian origin. It's almost a religion. And I'm not unique. There's loads of people from ethnic backgrounds who absolutely adore cricket and play it, but they're not getting through to the top level. So something has happened. Something has gone wrong. We don't know what that is. But we can't go any further forward unless the people involved in Cricket Scotland, the people involved in the game here in Scotland, accept the reports of this finding. They have to accept it. And then we need to go finding out what we can not only do about it, but why this has happened.
Thank you for your time this morning. Sandesh Gillane there, MSP for the Conservative Party in Scotland, talking about the recent report into drug deaths in Scotland. But stay with us, don't go anywhere, because coming up, with a sharp rise in people opting for private health treatment on the back of NHS waiting lists, we'll discuss why this has happened and what needs to be changed. But first, here's Tamsin with the news.
Deanna, thank you. Good morning. It's 11:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Roads to the port of Dover are reportedly flowing normally after 2 days of disruption, causing chaos for travellers and lorry drivers. Officials at the port say they've worked around the clock to clear both freight and tourist traffic in Dover. British authorities say they've received strong support from their French border colleagues to clear the backlog of more than 200 miles worth of traffic. Liz Truss has vowed to implement a tough line on immigration should she become Prime Minister. The Foreign Secretary has pledged to extend the Rwanda scheme, meaning migrants who cross the English Channel in small boats can be sent to the African nation. She also promised to increase frontline border staff numbers by 20% and strike Rwanda-type deals with more countries. The latest polling shows voters believe Rishi Sunak would make a better Prime Minister than Liz Truss. An opinion survey of 2,000 adults found 43% back the former Chancellor, compared to 36% for the Foreign Secretary. This is in contrast to Conservative Party members, where a YouGov poll has placed Liz Truss 24 points ahead of Rishi Sunak. A state of emergency has been declared in part of California as a wildfire continues to rapidly spread near Yosemite National Park. The so-called Oak Fire has exploded in size since starting on Friday, but firefighters are still unable to get any of it under control 24 hours later. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to the political correction in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, loads of you getting in touch with some of your favourite political moments from the campaign trail, and I must say, some good political gaffes as well. But the first one is absolutely not a gaffe. This is Daryl, who says, the greatest political campaign in the last generation was the Leaving the EU campaign, and the moment we found out we would be leaving the EU was one of the great moments of my life and a shock to the establishment, which was even better to see.
And we've got another Daryl, actually, says, my favourite moment was Boris Johnson driving a JCB through the wall. He knew how to connect with people.
And there it is on screen. You can see it there with the Get Brexit Done JCB. And then we've also got Gordon, who says, Neil Kinnock falling in the sea is my favourite moment of any political campaign. And here it is on screen for you to see. The literal start of the downfall of Kinnock. Keep up the good work. And there it is.
That was actually, he'd just been elected leader of the Labour Party in 1983, and that was the conference at Brighton just after it was announced that he was a new leader. So I think this was probably his first photo call, actually. And Glenys Kinnock, his wife, who was in the shot with him, she said later that she was furious with him because she wanted it to be really professional. Here's the new leader kind of thing, and he just decided to wade into the sea and then try and escape the waves and went base over apex, as the saying goes.
Sometimes I quite like seeing that human side, though. I'd rather see it because we're all clumsy, we all fall over, we all fumble our words from time to time. I would much prefer that to some sort of automaton, I think.
Yeah, and actually, just to ride it out, I think that the problem is sometimes politicians try to pretend it didn't happen.
Yes.
Or they get embarrassed by it and make the situation worse. But, you know, just to say, look, I'm human and I do the same things as you. Sometimes I mess up. Does make them, I think, seem more human to people.
Come on then, Paul, what about you? What are some of your favourite moments?
I think Prescott thumping the voter takes some beating, doesn't it? I mean, whether or not you would call that a gaffe, I guess most people would. But what I found interesting about that was in, I think, 2001, the general election campaign, 2001. I think it was a farmer who chucked an egg at him. And Prescott used to be an amateur boxer when he was a young man, so he was quite tasty with his hands, and he just clumped him with a straight left jab. But what I found interesting about it is lots of people I spoke to afterwards, generally members of the public, were fairly supportive of him because they kind of thought, well, actually, yeah, you're a politician, but it doesn't mean you should be abused. It doesn't mean people should just throw things at you. And they kind of admired him for fighting back, literally, in that particular case. So that was a big moment, I thought.
Definitely. I think for me, one of the most memorable, which wasn't a campaign moment per se, but it was actually at Conservative Party conference, was the Theresa May speech.
Oh, God.
With the P45, with the cough, and then with the letters falling off the wall behind it. I was in the room.
Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong.
And you were kind of torn between just having your absolute head in your hands and wanting to escape as quickly as you could.
Even
finding it hilarious.
Even I had sympathy with the Conservative leader at that moment.
Absolutely.
You know, so
don't worry, Philip Hammond was on hand with a strepsil, so all was well. And we've got a few more here. We've got John, who says, how about the time when Roy Jenkins was campaigning in the Peak District, stood up to make a speech and allegedly said, I'm delighted to be in Bakewell, which is famous for its tart.
And Sally says, oh, I can't read this one. You're going to have to read Sally. I can't
go on. Go on, have an ego.
OK. Paul would make a good leader of the opposition, but as a Conservative, the only leader of the opposition, the funniest moment has to be Neil Kinnock on the beach, which we've already spoken about, or Gordon Brown and the bigoted woman, Gillian Duffy.
I forgot about that one.
That was a huge foot-in-mouth moment, wasn't it? That was a
Absolutely.
2010 election in Rochdale and clearly thought his mic was switched off. And the ironic thing is, Gillian Duffy had been traditionally a Labour voter all of her life, and just because she happened to raise concerns over the level of immigration, he called her a bigoted old woman. And, you know, I think that really strikes at the heart of what's problematic with the modern Labour Party. They do look upon traditional voters like that as a bit bigoted. That's been part of the party's problem.
I think that's true. I think that's one that I found kind of especially funny at the time as well, because I was sort of doing politics A-level, and my teacher was called Mrs. Duffy. And the first I saw of it was Gordon Brown calls Mrs. Duffy bigoted old woman. I was like, what has she done? You know, so
but the worst thing he did, actually, he went to her house afterwards to apologise, which I just think made the scene... It was almost like returning to the scene of the crime. Yes. Instead of just driving off and apologising later, he went back to the house, the press were camped outside, the story ran and ran. She refused to come out and do a photo call with him, so it just whipped it up even more. I think that was a real error.
Absolutely. Well, there have certainly been some good ones over the years, haven't there? And I'm sure we will see.
Ed Miliband with a bacon sandwich.
And Theresa May with the chips.
Theresa May with the chips, yeah.
Oh, why as a politician do you feel the need to eat on camera? It's so bizarre just to kind of prove you're a man of the people.
A hamburger, a McDonald's burger with a knife and fork.
Was it not a hot dog at a barbecue with a knife and fork?
It's the sort of thing they do in Chipping Norton. And...
True. But the fact that we know so many of these moments is really weird, I think.
Yeah, slightly scary. Actually.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are vaguely
not that we're
normal
obsessive.
people, I promise. But thank you for sharing some of those great campaign memories. But we're going to move on to something genuinely a bit more serious now, around NHS waiting times. Because it's been found that they've led to a 39% rise in people opting to turn to private healthcare services for their operations. The rise, equating to around 69,000 more people, has led many to take out loans and resort to crowdfunding to fund their treatment. So what questions does this raise about the future of the NHS? And does this raise a debate over whether private healthcare should and will become more normalised? Now, Paul, for me, one of the things that I find the most frustrating about the NHS debate, as certainly coming at it as a Tory, is the second, as a Conservative, you even mention the P word, you mention privatisation, or you don't even need to say it, you mention reform, instantly you get attacked, mainly from people on the left, saying you're a Tory, all you want to do is privatise. But actually, clearly things aren't working the way that they should be. So why can we not have a rational debate about whether more elements of privatisation might be the right thing? They might not be, but we can't even have the debate these days.
No, and I think we should be able to have the debate. I think there probably is a genuine concern among people that there are elements of the Conservative Party that would like to privatise the National Health Service.
If there are, I haven't met them.
No, OK, but I suspect that may not be for ideological reasons in terms of why they wouldn't articulate that publicly. I suspect it might be for tactical reasons because they know it wouldn't necessarily go down well. And I think if you look at the Tories in power, most other public services, they have either privatised or tried to privatise at some point. Now, it may well be that Tories say, well, we would never do the NHS because that's one step too far. But I think it's understandable that there's a certain degree of scepticism among the public. I agree, it shouldn't be off limits as a... I mean, I'm an NHS man. I want to defend the NHS as somebody on the left, but I recognise that there are things that are clearly not right with it. I mean, I think the average cost per capita for each person in Britain in terms of the NHS is something like £2,000. Now, you can get private health care on average for about £1,500 a year in this country. So you've got to ask the question, if the NHS as a public service is costing more than what you could get private health care for, there's something wrong. If that were the case with education, where the cost per capita of students was outstripping what it would cost for private education, you'd be saying, hold on a second, there's something seriously wrong here. But I think you also need to factor in, you know, the COVID and the pandemic and the restrictions, and the fact that the bill now for some of the mad cut restrictions that were imposed has started to land, something like 6.6 million on the waiting lists. And to be honest, Annie, the idea that people who have paid taxes and expect something from the NHS on the rare occasions they might call upon it, but are now feeling obliged to take out loans in order to pay for operations because they're in pain and they can't wait for 2 years, that is completely unacceptable in a civilised society. So these questions need to be raised, and I'm more than happy to have an open debate about it.
Yeah, I think we need to, because there are clearly issues. And, you know, I've had friends who literally have taken out loans to go private just to kind of get ahead. What would you make of, because there are some people who've gone private for a long time, they can afford to. What would you make of something like tax breaks for people who choose to go through private healthcare on the basis that they're opting out, they're not actually costing the taxpayer money by using it?
You know, I'm not necessarily ideologically opposed to it. I'm not ideologically opposed to all market involvement in the National Health Service. I think it's almost impossible to take a purist approach where you say absolutely nothing within the health service, even to, you know, the cleaners who are putting toilet rolls in the toilets. It can't be coming from the private sector. The question is how far. As long as the core service remains in public hands, which I think is vital, as long as it remains free at the point of use for people. I think it's a great principle, and it's a hallmark of a civilised society that you all pay in, and when you need it, when you're sick, you will get something. But the problem is, at the moment, people are not getting the service they should be expecting. So I'm happy to examine ways to make sure people do get that service. But we do need to look at the way that the NHS is structured. I think it's bloated with bureaucrats. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's true, actually. There are too many bureaucrats. And the way some of the money is spent, I think, needs to be scrutinised a little bit more closely as well.
So I think you made a really key point there. I think many people at home just want to know that if they turn up to A&E with a serious issue, they will be treated, they won't have to pay anything. And people want to know that if they need an operation that's maybe a bit like sort of elective surgery, that they're going to get seen pretty quickly. They're not going to be on a waiting list for 2 years. And I think when it comes to how that's delivered, be that through NHS core services or if it's outsourced to the private sector or whatever, I think most people don't mind, do they?
Well, New Labour had this thing, Tony Blair had this thing about choice in public services. He was obsessed with giving people choice, choice, even when it comes to NHS hospitals. Where do you want your operation? Now, I think people want choice when it comes to where they're going on holiday. People want choice when it comes to, you know, what new car they're going to buy. I think when it comes to something like healthcare, and if you need an operation because there's something wrong with you, I don't think people obsess about choice. I don't think they want a brochure saying, well, you can go to this hospital or you can go to that hospital. I think what they want is my nearest hospital able to do it for me, and can they do it quickly? I don't really want this whole plethora of choices. Just get me the operation and get it done quickly. And New Labour had this obsession with choice, and I don't think most people share it.
I don't think it should be sort of like an Argos catalogue whereby you can choose from the top sort of 200 hospitals, but certainly I know in my constituency I've got a fantastic hospital, Bishop Auckland Hospital, lost its A&E back in, I think, 2004. But that does a lot of elective surgeries, and actually there are a lot of my constituents who, given the choice, they would choose to go to that hospital rather than go into Darlington or to sort of James Cook further afield. So I think there's more of that than you might think, certainly for elective surgeries where people are waiting, particularly to go somewhere closer to home where they know relatives, it's going to be easier for them to visit, or public transport to get them there might be a little bit easier.
I think that's the point, though, isn't it, where you said where people are waiting. I think where the waiting lists are, there's a discrepancy between waiting lists, and one is much longer than another. I think it's perfectly reasonable. People say, well, I will choose that one because they're more likely to do it quickly. But if all hospitals are operating at their proper capacity, and if they're doing what they should do, then I don't think people are particularly interested in choice when it comes to hospitals. I think they want that in other areas of their life, but not particularly for healthcare.
Let's talk about GPs. There are massive issues with GP appointments at the moment.
I think this situation is crisis point, really, with GPs. I mean, so many people have been struggling over the last 2.5 years to get face-to-face appointments. We're reading stories every week in the newspapers of people, because they haven't been able to get a face-to-face appointment, they weren't diagnosed properly, they end up having a serious condition. Some people have died as a result of that. And it's just, I said on the programme a few weeks ago, it's got a bit of a sense of the last days of Pompeii about the whole thing, where people can't get into the NHS for an operation, they can't see their GP unless they're prepared to wait for 6 weeks, by which time either they've got worse or the situation has recovered itself. And public services generally just not functioning properly. You know, people can't get a passport, the police are not arresting people, people can't get a driving licence, the paramedics don't turn up for an hour. And that needs to be addressed seriously. So over to you.
Over to us. Well, certainly I hope that whenever the new leader is put into place at the start of September, that is going to be a priority. Because, you know, certainly looking at my inbox as an MP, it's GP appointments, hospital waits and passports as some of the key things that are coming through.
And you know, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that you cannot diagnose or give people a proper assessment over the phone in the way that you can do if you see them face to face and examine them. And, you know, they talk about doing Zoom consultations and stuff like this. Many people who go to the GPs are elderly by definition, and they don't have these online platforms. They're not familiar with them. They're apprehensive about using them. They want a good old-fashioned local doctor who can check them over and, if necessary, prescribe treatment. And people are not getting that, and that, I think, is a real crisis in our country.
I use an NHS service that does have a digital option, and I tend to use it because I'm quite tech-savvy. I'm a millennial. I do everything on my phone, basically. And I think rolling out more of that so that those of us who feel comfortable doing that can do so, I think would definitely ease pressure on face-to-face services. But anyway, we could fix anything on this show between us, I reckon, Paul, couldn't we? But let's move on, because we want to get an update on the week's biggest stories from the world of sport, and we're joined here in the studio by sports commentator and broadcaster Aidan McGee. Well, Aidan, we've got a bit of a health spin, haven't we, on the sports
so I was
story
just
today?
thinking about your political gaffes earlier on. That's actually happened to me on Brighton Beach. I did actually try and roll in from the waves and fall over. That was in 1992. So I'm a QPR shell suit, totally ruined. But no, talking about your political gaffes, I remember, I think Peter Mandelson was contesting Hartlepool back in 1983. He was directed towards a fish and chip shop locally, and he walked in. He was meant to order the fish and chips with mushy peas, except he didn't recognise the mushy peas, and instead he said, "I'll have the fish and chips and the guacamole."
Yeah, apparently that was a true story. I'm sceptical about it. You can't imagine saying that sort of thing, not even knowing what mushy peas were.
Exactly. But no, sports. Cristiano Ronaldo. Interesting. There's a report on the back of the Sunday People today by Steve Bates, a man who knows Manchester United very well. Used to work with him myself in my News of the World days up there. He's saying that there's a compromise agreement. We know that 3 weeks ago, Ronaldo said he would like to leave Manchester United to play in the Champions League. He signed a 2-year deal last summer. If he left now, that would be a year too early. United are saying possibly they might let him go out on loan to satisfy his desire to play in the Champions League, as long as he comes back next summer and triggers an extra 1 year, by which time, in theory, United will be back in the Champions League. I mean, it's easier said than done when it's easier to do it with Ronaldo than without him, I would suggest. But he comes back next season, having spent a year on loan at maybe Atletico Madrid or something like that, somewhere like that, and then he plays another season there. So,
but how old will he be when he comes back?
Well, he's 36 now, so he'll be 37. But he regards that as a challenge, though, Paul. I mean, the older he gets, the better he gets, it seems to be. But the problem with United is that they're very reluctant to let him go. Not only do they miss his presence on the pitch, but they've got multiple sponsorship deals all around the world, and all
his box office,
far-flung areas of the world. And they expect Ronaldo to be lining up to Manchester United. That's why they're involved in the club. It's part of the cachet of getting involved with a club like Manchester United, because they've got top players and they want to see him there. So there could be a compromise deal there. United are open to it, but publicly they're still saying he's not for sale. They drew yesterday against Aston Villa 2-2, having been 2-0 up until late in the game. Villa got 2 goals back as well. We've got the Lionesses playing on Tuesday night at Bramall Lane.
Hey.
They're going to be playing Sweden. Tough assignment, that. Diana, really probably the top side in Europe at the moment, Sweden. Don't forget, France got through last night, third in the world. Germany is still in it. You can't discount them. They're going to be playing the semi-final on Wednesday. So I think we're probably seeing the best 4 teams in the tournament in the semi-final.
We've probably got as good a chance as any, do you think?
I think England...
Especially Bramall Lane being home.
England on a Tuesday night in Sheffield will be a raucous crowd. I think that it will be a very difficult job for Sweden to do. It's not playing England in Portugal in the middle of July or something like that. This is different. This is a Tuesday night in Sheffield, rarefied crowd. I think they'll get right behind them. I think they've got an excellent chance. But I do think that this going to be. I think the winner may well come from that game.
I do think it's been absolutely brilliant seeing the level of kind of buzz around women's football Because it seems a lot bigger than it has been in the past.
Yeah, it's taken off since 2015. I do worry that they're building it from the top down instead of the bottom up. The problem is that I remember the National North Atlantic Soccer League in America back in the 80s. They got Pele and Beckenbauer, Rodney Marsh, all these players going over. Bobby Moore, yeah. Now they did it from the top, and when those players retired, because they were at the end of it, they were quite advanced in age at the time as well. There was nothing coming up below them, because they tried to do things too quickly. Not enough girls are playing football in schools. That needs to change if we're going to see the vacuum filled up, because these players that are currently on the scene are not going to last forever and ever. However, Premier League clubs are behind it, and there's sensible scheduling as well. They've scheduled the Euros in a summer where there's not much other sport going on. Wimbledon's finished. There's no Olympics. There's no World Cup. They've been lucky in a way, because the World Cup men's is going to be happening later in the year. But also the pricing is right as well. They've achieved good attendances because they've been selling tickets for £5 and £10. They've been saying kids come along free. They've seen the wisdom in reducing the prices to get bums on seats rather than maybe charging a bit more for the tickets and seeing it. No one benefits from having a half an attendance there. That was a Premier League ground 2 years ago.
I've never understood why top clubs don't do that more for FA Cup. Some clubs do it for FA Cup games when the stadium is half full, but actually saying, look, we'll let kids in for free, because they are the next generation.
They are, and you're not going to get. There's a lot of other competing sports around who are willing to take your customer away from you. Football wants to sustain itself and continue as the number one sport in the world. It needs to bring those young kids in and keep them.
QPR might even get some fans through the door.
I went yesterday. We played Crystal Palace's unvaccinated team. I bought the shirt yesterday as well.
Score?
We lost 3-0.
Oh, well, there you go. Just another Saturday for QPR.
always the bickering between the boys. Thank you so much for sticking with us. You've been watching The Political Correction. Join us next Sunday at 10 for 2 more hours of discussion, debate and analysis. But up next, it's the fabulous Alistair Stewart.
OK, let's have a look at the weather for you. The UK has a bit of a mixed picture. Rain in the northwest, sunshine in the southeast. Here are the details.
Well, it'll be a rather cloudy picture across southwest England this lunchtime, with the risk of some patchy light rain. A few glimmers of sunshine are possible, mainly in the east.
Lots of blue sky and sunshine across southeast England by midday. Temperatures climbing quickly into the mid-20s, feeling warm with some light winds.
South Wales will remain on the cloudy side this lunchtime with outbreaks of rain. The rain could be heavy at times, temperatures reaching 21.
Now let's have a look at the Midlands for you. It's going to be mostly cloudy by midday. The risk of some patchy light rain or drizzle. Feeling a little bit muggy as well as temperatures climb into the low 20s. Should be a little bit breezy as well.
Often cloudy skies are expected this lunchtime across northeast, with the best of any sunnier breaks expected towards Newcastle. Breezy with perhaps a few light showers. Temperatures up to 23.
Southern parts of Scotland seeing some sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers heavy, but they will move quickly on the brisk southwesterly breeze. Highs of 20.
And in Northern Ireland, often cloudy across the country this lunchtime, with scattered heavy showers, windy towards the east coast, feeling muggy with some sunny spells developing in places. Temperatures about 20.
So unsettled in the northwest throughout the rest of the day, dry and sunny in the southeast. And that's your forecast.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world.